What tools do you have and do you recommend for leaders, new and experienced leaders, in helping them best manage and help support their employees?
One of the first things I always tell folks, and we talk about, is why. Why are you doing what you're doing, and what outcome are you looking for? And I think we've talked about this in previous videos, and it's the idea of intent. As a leader, what do you really want? Am I looking at this employee thinking, I'm pretty sure I'm going to have to fire him, so I want to make sure that I have everything well documented when I do, right? Everything I do could end up in court. I know that. I was taught that by HR, so I want to protect myself and the company, because when I fire this person, I want to show that I did all the right stuff. That might sound, by my attitude and by my tone of voice, you might think, he thinks that's a bad thing. And I really don't. That's not a bad thing if you're trying to manage the risk and you're trying to reduce your exposure to liability and your company's exposure. And a good manager should do that. However, I would add to that. That's kind of the bare minimum that you should be covering. Those means you covered your bases and you did a good job as a manager. What I really look for in leaders is, as you're going through this process of coaching or training or correcting or redirecting, is your intent to help an employee be successful, or is your intent to protect yourself when you have to fire someone? You can do both, and really should do both. What I'd like to do in this conversation is really talk about the process of, or the mindset of, helping people successfully accomplish the mission of the company. If you do that, you're building a regenerative culture rather than just trying to be sustainable and trying to protect yourself along the way. So the first thing is, do we have a tool for that? Well, absolutely, yes, we do have a tool for that. In our book, Influence on Purpose, 5 Principles for Leaders to Build Regenerative Cultures. And
So
the
I
tool
want to
is in the... Yeah, go ahead.
just wanted to drive home something you said, that the tool doesn't matter if your intent is not there. Tools, whether it's like a hammer could be a tool, or you ever seen a 2-year-old with a hammer? It could be a tool of destruction or of building something. Tools are great,
Exactly right.
but you first have to start with your intent.
Yeah. So it requires 2 things, doesn't it? If you think about, let's use that idea of a hammer, right? If you could be a carpenter using a hammer to build a building, what's your motive if you're that carpenter? Let's say you're building a cathedral. And if you were to come up and ask that carpenter, what are you doing here? And this is an old story. I'm adapting it for this conversation, so I'm not pretending this is original to me. You ask this carpenter, what are you doing here? And one carpenter might say, hammer and nails. I'm working, putting in my time. The next person might say, I'm building a building. I'm making a building, applying my skills to create something. And the third carpenter might say, I'm building a cathedral where people can come to worship and feel a sense of community and hope. That's what I'm doing. I show up every day to do that. So what is our intent? Let me apply that very quickly. Am I going through a performance review with someone because it's my job and I'm putting in my time and I'm supposed to do that? I can check off that I did it. Am I going through a performance review with someone because it's my job to protect the company and myself? So if I have to let this person go, I've well documented that I had good reason to do so, and I've created safety for all of us. Or am I going through this performance review to help someone really rise up to accomplish the mission of the company and build their career in a way that blesses them and their family, as well as the people we serve? Doing the same job, but your intent does make all the difference. Now, the tool we talk about, the next thing you might wonder about is, okay, I've got the right intent, but how do I know if I should be coaching? How should I know if I should be providing training? Or do they have enough resources? Am I managing this person appropriately? Am I micromanaging? Have I abandoned them? Did I dump on them? How do I know these things? We actually have a tool to help you determine all of those things. It's funny, in the book, if you get the book, and I hope you do, in Chapter 8, we call this the assessment of team trust. And it is that. But since the book has been published, we've renamed it a stewardship planner. The stewardship planner goes with that understanding that as I lead people, I have a stewardship. It means I have an obligation to help them with their career. I have a stewardship for helping them be successful in the work they're doing, as well as a stewardship for serving the company where I work and the team that I'm a part of. So I really, when I think of leadership, I often think in terms of stewardship. If you want to know more about that and you grab this book, I wrote quite a bit about that in the conclusion of the book, of what it really means to be a steward. So looking at your leadership role as a stewardship role, this tool of Stewardship Planner can help you determine what's needed from you to help this person be more successful. I want to make a clear point here, though. Every leader should understand the difference between control and influence. You're not going to control someone else's behavior or their outcomes, but you are always having an influence. How do you make sure that you're an influence for good, giving that person or your team the best opportunities to be successful? So that's really what this tool is designed for. So we'll put this up on the screen, and what you'll see is the overall template for the tool, how it's used. You put the person's name in up on the right side, and then how are they doing in terms of alignment with the values of the company? How are they doing? Do they have a good understanding of the vision of the company? And is that compelling for them? Do they care about what you're trying to accomplish together? Whenever you hear us say mission, we're talking about understanding of who our stakeholders are and how we serve them and meet their needs. So are they aligned with the values, vision, and mission of the company? You're going to know if they're a good fit in your culture as a person and as a teammate. After that, we're going to look at engagement. Do they have the capabilities to do the job that you've asked them to do or that they've been assigned to do? I like to think of it this way. It makes it easy to remember. Do you have the time, the talent, the team, and the tools required to do the job? Meaning, do they have the resources to get the job done, including their own talent and skills? Have they had that training? If you've evaluated that and there's a gap there, you'll know very quickly what they need from you. They need training. They need help. They need a budget. They need better technology. You'll be able to figure that out quickly in this part of the assessment. The final part of the assessment is, do I consistently get the results that I'm looking for from this person in their role? As you look at that, if the answer is no, or they're struggling in that area, that can come for one of two reasons. One reason could be one of those previous things that we've assessed. Are they not aligned with the core values, with the vision or the mission of the company? And I do need to provide better coaching. Do they not have the resources required in terms of time, talent, team, and tools to do what's expected of them? If so, then I need to help them with those resources or make sure they are provided. I've seen it happen, and you'll see this a little later. Every once in a while, rarely, you'll see that all of those are fine, and you still aren't getting the results you want. What I look for then is, am I managing this person appropriately? Am I providing more management than they need? Am I kind of hovering? Micromanaging is the word. Or have I kind of dumped them into this site without giving them the support and follow-up for them to have the clarity on what's expected or to know what the priorities are and what we're looking for in their role? So in that last one, it'll either be an indicator of something that I've already seen, or it'll be an indicator that I'd better take a good look at my management style and does it meet this person's needs at this time.
This is a great tool for helping you to manage your team members. Does this only apply to underperforming ones?
One of the strengths of this tool is it's not just for underperforming team members. It's not all about corrective actions. I think one of the strengths that we have that I just haven't heard a lot of other places is, let me explain something here real quick. One of the things that we'll hear people talk about, when they do an assessment, they'll say, these are the strengths that you have, and these are your opportunities for improvement, as though people avoid using the term weaknesses. And that's really unfortunate, because for two reasons. One, we don't have to ignore the fact that we all have weaknesses. Is that weakness affecting our work? And we'll do a video on that in the future, I'm sure. But in this conversation, is it affecting the work? And if so, how do I address it? That's kind of the hard cost of not identifying a weakness as a weakness. We're dancing around egos, trying to make the message soft, and so we lack clarity on what needs to be improved. Even worse is the opportunity cost of that kind of a conversation. the opportunity cost of calling a weakness an opportunity for improvement is we don't recognize that our biggest opportunities for improvement come by leveraging our strengths. So I use what I call the 70-30 rule. Focus 70% of your attention on and effort on building on your strengths, and 30% on overcoming or dealing with the weaknesses that could hold you back or are holding you back. So with that in mind, I like to make sure that we're building on strengths even more than we're just redirecting a weakness of some sort. So we can walk through the tool that you've just seen and kind of how it applies to each of those areas and how you can use it as a coaching opportunity. We actually use this tool for new executives who are stepping into a new role because they're reevaluating their mission and kind of the essential functions of their work and the capabilities they have at this new level. So across the board, we use this for people who are really successful, who are looking to succeed at the next level.
So if you have an employee who is difficult, underperforming, not responding to feedback, how can you use this tool to help him or her?
Let's go through some examples. The first one, let's take a look at what happens when you don't have alignment with values. We have this, if you look at the chart, we have this person that we'll call Brandon. And all of these, by the way, as we go through all these, we'll go through one for each area, each section. Each one of these comes from a real life situation. These weren't just made up. I've changed the names just to respect people's privacy, but all of these circumstances do exist. In this case, we are working with the team and assessing how strongly they felt they were set up to accomplish the key priorities of the company. In some organizations, they would call that their big rocks. And one of the people on the team, one of the executives, kind of scored himself this way when it came to one of the priorities. And it was this. He didn't feel he valued that particular outcome. It did not align with the things that he was valuing at that time. He didn't see it as bad, he just didn't see it as a priority. And as far as the vision, he wasn't sure how it would really help the organization be successful. He didn't see that that the juice was worth the squeeze, so to speak. And then it was funny because on mission he was green. He felt like he understood his stakeholders well, those people he served. He knew what they needed. They had good working relationships. But then when it came to capabilities, he felt like he was concerned that if he didn't see this as a priority, he wasn't really going to spend the time on it to make it work. And so he was very much in doubt as to whether he'd get the job done or not, or be able to contribute meaningfully. He wasn't a red, as if he were totally off. He didn't hate the idea. He wasn't totally against it. He just had so much on his plate that he wasn't sure how this was going to fit, and he didn't see it being important enough to replace something that was already there. So this gave the leader a chance to kind of listen, but then provide the coaching needed to help reprioritize if it turned out that was necessary. But it also gave the team a chance to take a look and say, well, let's take a look at the priorities we have here. Are they all top priorities? I've had that happen before. We're working with a company where they assumed their core values were their core values, but when they tried to apply them to their strategies, they found that they just didn't hold up. What they did was they had created nice-sounding words to put up on the wall and on their website for marketing purposes, but they didn't drive strategy. So this gives you the opportunity to assess, are our values truly core, and will they drive our strategies by and by? So, of course, the next thing in line is vision after values. And in this case, we have Mark, who was evaluating how well he felt he could contribute to the strategic priority on the team. Certainly, Mark didn't struggle with personal integrity. He was a member of the team. People weren't worried about his honesty or his decency or his main character traits. But he wasn't sure he really personally connected with the company's values. So with that, he was then unclear about the vision or direction of the company, mostly because he just didn't see it as important to him. So it kind of bridged over from the values. And then when it came to mission, he said, I'm just read on this. I have no understanding of what's expected here and what people need from me. I'm not sure. what success would even look like. He was very skilled. And if think about this, you've probably had this experience if you've hired people for their skills, right? That's what had happened here. Good person, highly capable, very skilled, and he had the resources provided to him, but no alignment, right? And then what about results? Well, he had good job performance, but he was frustrated and dissatisfied with the role he was in. And even though he was getting things done, he could look at that and say, is that really the stuff I want to do? So there was a disconnect. So not an underperformer in terms of he needed to be in trouble for not doing his job. But just as, and it's interesting because he felt frustrated before, but until he went through this process, he couldn't tell you why. And that's one of the things you will find as you use this tool. It will help you uncover issues that might be nagging at you that you just can't quite put your finger on.
So I think other people, I've heard it referred to, it's a fit problem, or
yes,
in other books they call it right person, wrong seed, or wrong person, right seed. So they can do the job, but they really aren't the right person for the job just because it's a fit issue, not because they're a bad person.
So if you think about, I love the saying that we hear from some we've worked with in medical practices as well, as far and helping them with leadership and organization and culture. And I've heard from some of our medical colleagues to prescribe without diagnosing is malpractice, right? That's what's true of leadership. This is a chance to diagnose before you prescribe, before you figure out what kind of stewardship this person requires from you, what kind of leadership is needed in this case. So the next one, of course, is mission. And this one came up, this was actually the CEO of this group, and we'll go to a different group in some of these others. These are not all from the same leadership team, but this one does happen to be. So the leader evaluated herself on these priorities and interestingly came across it in this way. Let me make a real quick point here. I would actually, if you're the leader of your team and you're going through this process, I would do this one first. It sets a good example, especially if you're not trying, if your ego doesn't get in the way and you don't try to pretend you're perfect at everything across the board. If you're doing that, that's another problem. Give us a call. We'll help you with it. But in this case, the leader had a really healthy perspective, didn't struggle with issues of being overly prideful. And as she went through this process, she said, I absolutely see the importance of these priorities. These are my priorities. Then she was able to say, I have a very clear view and expectation of where we go from here and what we're to accomplish and why it's important. But you know what? I haven't been here for very long, and I've spent my first year and a half really putting out fires and dealing with hot issues. And so I haven't been able to be as strategic yet. And this is my entering into becoming more strategic and getting out of that problem-solving mode. So I don't feel as connected with our stakeholders as I think I should be. I think I need to back up a little bit and start listening to folks and understanding what their needs are, what are their concerns, so that I have a better understanding of, for our stakeholders, what they need from me and what success would look like. As far as capabilities, she was highly skilled, no problem whatsoever there. And then when it came to results, she said, failure to align with the stakeholders will compromise my outcomes or our outcomes. So she knew what she needed to do to get this up to where she could actually trust herself to accomplish these strategic priorities. The wonderful thing that happened in addition, the content was very powerful. Even more powerful was everybody in the team who followed her then felt very comfortable being honest where they felt uncomfortable. I know that sounds ironic, but it's important to be honest about where you feel uncomfortable. And they had, and maybe comfortable is the wrong word. Let me say it this way. Because of her example, they were given the confidence and the safety to be honest about where they felt uncomfortable or where they saw gaps for themselves. Every person on that team was competent and qualified to be there. There were no failures there. So they were able to have the conversations they needed to have.
Interesting. So that's the fit side, the alignment side of the tool. Is this the right person? Do they know why they're doing what they're doing? Does it matter to them? And you might not always get a perfect, if you're working at an entry-level job or it's just a job, I don't want to throw out names. Sometimes you're just doing a job. But if you really want that regenerative culture we're looking for, you have to be able to see the value in what you're doing and why it matters. And that's why this alignment side is really so important.
And one thing I would point out is you were just mentioning, this is all about alignment. In any of these areas, if you do find a gap, this is an opportunity for coaching. And when I say coaching, I mean helping people understand the connection between actions and consequences. And there's a hierarchy that you could communicate here. First is the consequences to the work itself. Hopefully people can see that and say, oh, that's important to me. They might say, I still don't get it. You know? It's not, I don't find that all that motivating. The next level is, or you just don't see a change in their performance in this area. The next would be the consequences to your teammates, right, or other stakeholders. Sometimes you get to that level and they go, okay, yeah, it's you were, I guess, no such thing as a former Marine, right? But you were an active Marine for 10 years. And one of the things you learn, and I've heard from you, is no man left behind, right? That one of the greatest motivating factors of being Marine is supporting the people around you, the people you go to battle with, right? So that's part of who we are as human beings, especially when we have strong character and when we can look around with empathy. So that can be a huge motivator. Then the final level, well, the second to last level of motivation is going to be, if I have to keep managing you as your leader, this takes up time I really don't want to be spending, right? I don't mind spending time with you. I want to coach you, but we need to be seeing progress. Without progress, then the cost to me is high. Now, that's not meant to be egocentric, but it is a fact, right? I work with great leaders who are striving to help their whole company to be successful. They can't afford to spend 80% of their time with one person who just keeps not getting it, right? So, and then finally would be, those are all natural consequences. And if the natural consequences aren't motivating enough, there is the imposed consequence. And the imposed consequence would sound something like, if you can't get into alignment, we can't keep you on the team. I might need to make a change in terms of where you work, or you might not work here at all anymore. Or we might put you in a different level. So the consequences you impose need, of course, fit. But I would only impose after I've communicated natural consequences and given the person a chance to create that alignment. So alignment equals a coaching opportunity.
All right, so moving further right on the chart, out of alignment and into the engagement. What examples would you have for that?
Well, here's one. We have Sue. This was a really interesting one. Sue had perfect alignment, just a great fit in the culture of the company. What's interesting about this, as you can see, we call this the assessment of team trust, or we used to, and now this is why we call this a stewardship assessment. When I went through this with Sue's leader, and Sue is not her real name, before we started the conversation, the leader said, when I asked, who do you trust most in your team? It was Sue. I trust Sue more than anyone else on the team. And this is why, because Sue had perfect alignment. She had an amazing work ethic and personal integrity and was aligned with the core values of the company. She had a very clear vision of what success would look like and was very motivated. She found it very compelling to be a part of this organization. She had incredibly good working relationships with all of her stakeholders, those who reported to her, those who were peers, those who she reported to, the owners of the company, all felt like she was just a perfect fit. And she is and was. And here's where it got interesting, because as we went through this process and we got to the capabilities, he said, I got to say yellow here. And it surprised him. He was expecting it to be green across the board. And when he said, I got to say yellow here. And I said, well, tell me about that. He said, she's spread too thin. She never says no to anything. And she's not really very good at delegating. So she takes everything on herself. And so the result is, because of that, she tends to overpromise and not get everything done. So there are some things that are being dropped. And I guess I'm just realizing that because I trust her so much. I'm just always assuming she's doing fine. Now, this man was a very good leader, and he was able to look at that without a whole lot of coaching and say, oh my gosh, I'm setting her up. And here's what he realized, is that because she never said no, he would just keep piling on, thinking it must be okay because she never says no. And he was able to sit down with her and show her this and say, here's what I've noticed. Let's talk about that. How is that happening? And they had a wonderful conversation, and they came up with a plan together. And here are some of the things that were part of that plan, just to give you some tips. But yours would be different. But in their case, they talked about how do you make it safe to say no. They realized that she needed coaching on how to develop and delegate to other people. And they learned that they were going to review priorities more regularly, because sometimes a new priority would overshadow an old priority, or sometimes you try to bring in a new priority and realize that old priority still is a priority, and we really don't need to be crowding. This maybe should go somewhere else. So there were at least 3 things that they could do very proactively that helped her. And now she's like one of the strongest people at developing people and delegating in that whole organization. And people from other areas of the company tell her, you are one of the most highly valued and highly trusted people in this whole very large company. So when this leader was able to see this, he very quickly was able to have the conversations he needed to do to help this person be even more successful. So remember, he wasn't even seeing her as struggling until he started to measure it in these terms. So when you take a look at capabilities, again, what are they? Time, talent, team, and tools. The tools weren't great, but that wasn't necessarily holding her back. Time was seriously a problem, and so was the team, right? Those two kind of worked together against her. So as she started learning to prioritize better, learning to develop better, and learning to delegate better, she found that she was able to perform at a much higher level. And indeed, it cleared the way for her career to keep moving.
I think it's important to point out that he found this, again, when she wasn't being a problem. I know the title of the video is How to Deal with Difficult Employees. But often difficult employees become difficult employees because they haven't been supported along the way, which is where she was headed. And you had someone who took the time to stop and look at that and recognize what needed to change. Because I could easily see this becoming Sue being the favorite, the golden girl who keeps dropping balls. And if he hadn't stopped to notice, I'm sure somebody else would have. And that would have damaged your whole team culture and relationship. Yeah. Or would have burned her out.
Yes, it would have burned her out, and that's the opposite of a regenerative culture. The other thing is, imagine just a little bit of empathy here goes a long way. Remember, picture Sue, right? Highly aligned, highly motivated, incredibly hardworking, failing because of too much work, because she was too trusted, right? Imagine what that would feel like to her. How demoralizing. So you'll find that this is a factor in some of the other areas too. Probably even this next one where we talk about Jamie, who struggled also with capabilities in another way. Very similarly to the last person, great fit with the company values, strong commitment to the company vision, and understands the stakeholder needs and connects really well with them. In this case, the technology was not up to the task that Sue was responsible for. This one was a learning experience for me. This was many years ago when I had just developed this tool. And then the leader said, when I said, well, how about results? And I was fully expecting to hear, well, either yellow, it's at risk, or red, we're failing, or she is. And he said, well, green. Here's where I am, even to this day, grateful for the presence of mind to not say, wrong answer, right? Because if one of these others is yellow or red, it's going to affect your results. But guess what? It hadn't yet. And that's what we found out in this conversation with this leader. I said, so instead of saying wrong answer, that's not possible, I said, that's really interesting. Tell me how that's happening. And he said, well, she's taken work home. She's coming in on weekends. She just will do whatever it takes to meet the requirements of her job, even though she's in essence working around the clock. And it's funny, he had never thought of it before because the results have always been, take a look at this. If you think about this and you're not looking at the chart and you're seeing this in real time, you know you've got someone who's got a great work ethic and a super good fit with your company and your company culture. You know you've got someone who consistently gets the work done. What is there to worry about? So until we went through this process, he didn't know there was something to worry about. And when he looked at that, he said, oh my goodness. I said, what's your concern? And he, again, brilliant leader. I'm burning her out. I'm going to burn her out. That's unfair. It's not fair to her. It's not fair to her family. It's not fair. I don't want to be that boss. I don't want to be that guy, right? And he didn't. So he had the chance to sit down and talk with her and say, here's what I see happening to you. I don't want this to go any further. What can we do? And they brainstormed ideas, and they came up with some solutions that would help get through, because it turned out they were in the process of replacing their technology. So they saw it as a somewhat short-term problem. They were able to bring in some extra help, reassign some of her duties, she still worked a little bit more than 40-hour week, but that was probably as much her nature as anything. But she wasn't working around the clock, and it wasn't costing her weekends. And so that ability to have that conversation, once again, diagnose before you prescribe, right? So this tool has helped. I can't tell you how many people look and have that, kind of palm to your forehead aha moment of, oh my goodness, I had no idea this was happening. So then the last section is results, right? What's happening here? This one is fascinating to me, and it's a great story for me to always remember. We're talking about Tim, and Tim was, again, great fit for the culture, hardworking. Tim had actually been with the company a few decades. He had been around a long time, and this company was more to him than just a company. It was his family. It was a place he loved to be, and people he loved to be with, and a job he'd love to be a part of. So as we walked through this, we saw this idea of capabilities, limited skills. He was managing his department, and then he was a red because he was failing as a manager. I said, he's been around a long time. What's happening here? And his supervisor, his boss, said, well, he just got promoted. And I said, well, what kind of support are you giving him as a new leader? Because he's been a very, very subject matter expert, very competent, highly skilled, kind of a superstar in the company, which is why he got promoted. And if anyone can say Peter principle, that's what happened, right? So the time that he had in this job was he was starting to fail. He was struggling. Now, here's where empathy really comes in. Imagine you're Tim. You've been around for a couple of decades. You have been a superstar the whole time. You got promoted because you were highly valued, and all of a sudden you're failing. You're failing in a job and in a place where you had amazing credibility and were very, very highly regarded, right? And why were you failing? Well, I asked, why is he failing? Are you giving him the support? Well, he's been around a long time. I don't want to micromanage him. So you'll hear this from us and others, but I want to repeat it here. You'll hear it in other videos. Micromanagement is not a one-size-fits-all, I manage too much. It means you're managing this person too much in these circumstances at this time. You have to be constantly evaluating because the landscape will change. Tim's landscape changed. He needed leadership at a different level. He needed support and training that he didn't need before. He needed time to get oriented to the job. He needed some guidance and coaching on how to be a good leader, as well as some training. So when this leader saw this, he was able to say, oh my goodness, I need to back up. So he was able to meet with Tim and say, man, I'm so sorry. I set you up for failure. I didn't mean to do that. So let's work on that. And they together were able to identify the gaps in training and in other resources that Tim needed to be successful. He did want to be a leader. He just didn't have the skills. He was used to being a peer and a pal. And as you'll see in other videos, that's not always a good formula for being a good leader. So that's one that, to me, weighs heavily. I will be forever grateful that we went through this process in time, so that Tim was able to get the support he needed to continue to be successful at a job and in a company that he absolutely loved.
So a lot of these examples, it always turns back on the leader of, are you being the leader your team needs so that they can succeed? Sometimes you have difficult people, difficult personalities, and that's a fit. It's not always going to be worked out. But if you're giving them the clear expectations and the consequences, you kind of hierarchy you went through, usually you can work something out there. That's the worst thing you can do, is to not have clear, usually, not always, sometimes it just isn't going to work out, right? And then you can respectfully say, this isn't working out. When you've done all this, not just the cover your behind part, but the, am I truly giving this person the chance they need part?
Exactly right. So. There have been some that we don't show here where a leader has worked with somebody for an extended period of time, an acceptable period of time, and there's still a number of reds, and they just find out this person's just not a good fit here. They're just, and I can't make them a good fit, and they don't really want to be a good fit. It was just a job for them, but they're not succeeding at it. So when that happens, assuming that there's not some flagrant moral, ethical, or legal violation, which if that happens, deal with it quickly and decisively.
Right.
But if it turns out they're just not a good fit, then help them be a good fit somewhere else, right? Mm-hmm. Give them the chance to transition and let them know that there's going to be a time limit, right? Come up with an acceptable time for them to transition to a new job or find some way to help them be successful somewhere else. What you find is a leader who's a great leader at heart is going to work hard to help others be successful, even when they don't align with your company's mission, even when that success happens somewhere else. What I have found is when leaders have that kind of heart and that kind of skill, their culture benefits from the energy that comes from that. So even if they're not going to succeed in your company, don't be too quick to just write them off and kick them out. Care about them as a human being and see if you can help them with a transition into something that works better for them. Now, you may or may not be able to do that, but if you can, you'll find that it really does pay dividends even in the company that you work in, even though that person's no longer a part of it. There's one more here that I want to go over that might surprise you. What happens if, and this, Rebecca, this goes back to your statement earlier that this is not all about problem employees, right? We had one person, we're going to call her Ellie, whose leader went through and said, green on values, green on vision, green on mission. She has all the skills she needs and all the resources, green on capabilities, green on results. I've never known her to let me down. Green across the board. Well, what do you do with that, right? And now I had a thought of of a concern that I would have, and I asked this leader of a concern that he had, and he had a different concern. It did raise at least two concerns. What were they? Now, you who are listening might think, well, there's a couple that are obvious to me, and so there might be a third or a fourth, or it might be the same ones we came up with. But this is a concern. Not that we wanted to see yellow or green or red in some of these spots. It's wonderful to see green. But what was happening? All of his focus was on the people who needed coaching to improve. All of his focus was on people who needed management to improve or who needed some sort of resource to improve, right? So the people who grabbed his attention were the people who were not being successful. And so Ellie was kind of going along without a whole lot of reinforcement, without anybody ever saying or often saying, you know what, you're doing a great job and I really appreciate it. So that was my concern is if you can't reinforce the right behaviors, chances are over time they will dwindle because how does someone know what's important if you're not reinforcing it? Now, Ellie was a good self-motivator, so it wasn't an urgent need, but over time that is a concern. And this leader had an even deeper concern. He said, what if she's bored and ready for a promotion? We need people who are ready to grow. If I let my time and energy be focused on people who are struggling, and I'm not paying attention to the people who can help really grow the company and move up, I'm failing as a leader. So he was able to sit down and talk with her and say, where do you want to go from here? What are your goals? You're doing such a good job. What's next for you? It gave her the opportunity to say, I like right where I am, but I sure appreciate being valued. Or, you know what? I want to rule the world one day, and this is just a step along the way. And he could help her get closer to that goal. So as I wrote this book, I kind of came across, I thought, how does this apply to me? Well, here's how it applied to me. Before I did this assessment, I would have people tell me, John, you should write a book. And I would think, why would I want to write a book? I don't need to write a book. There's all kinds of good books out there already, and I use them to help my clients. So I didn't recognize the value of writing a book. Consequently, I didn't know what a successful book would look like and how it would even help me. Why would writing a book be a good thing for anybody, me included? Next, how would it benefit those I serve? Because I'm pretty good at recommending other books. Why would my book be of any use to anyone? So how does that help me with my mission? Capabilities. Well, I had done some writing. I had written articles and a few papers and things like that, but I had never written a book. So it probably even generous saying yellow on capabilities of writing a book because there was a lot I didn't know. Results, absolutely another red on my scorecard because I had never written a book before. I didn't have a pattern of results of writing a book. Well, a few years later, in the work I did, I started to recognize there are things that we're doing in our practice at Influence on Purpose and things that I'm doing as a leadership coach that are different and that are helping people who were stuck and help them get traction and move forward. So I started to recognize there's a value in my perspective that I really wasn't seeing elsewhere that was making a difference. And then I could see, could develop a vision for how that would really be useful. What would a successful book actually look like? I started to get a picture of, here are the things that I'm doing or have been doing that I could have put in a book that people could benefit from. And then I could see absolutely the positive results that would come. So I got aligned with the idea. My life experience coached me into a place where I felt like I really ought to write a book. Well, that didn't change my capabilities a whole lot. I was still not real sure about the process. And even as far as the result, making the commitments and the follow-through on writing, I did not love writing a book. I got to tell you, I didn't love writing a book. So there were times when I felt inspired to write, and it's there. And there are times I had to put on I knew there was some just hard work that came with writing a book. And I had to put on my calendar after not writing a book for a while, write or else. I actually put it on my calendar so that I would sit down and work on writing this book. So I did do that, and pretty good work ethic, so I got it done. So now I do see the value of this book. I see it changing lives. I see it changing organizations. I can see how it is serving the people that I serve. I can see it being used in a very successful way. I care really deeply. Why do I even do what I do? Because I care deeply about people being able to be good leaders. And I believe everybody deserves good leadership. I think cultures should be regenerative. They shouldn't burn people out. So my mission's pretty clear. It didn't take long to get there. I learned a lot through this process. I gained the ability by receiving coaching, by doing research, and getting consulting with or contracting help to actually create a finalized book. And so the result, here you go. You've got a book. There's a book now available that has this and many other things that you could use to help you create a regenerative.
All right. So I guess the takeaway for me would be that difficult employees are always going to happen. But if you as a leader are supporting your employees before they become difficult, before the problems arise, you're in a better position to address them when they do arise, because they're going to arise. And you're in a better position to help get everyone on the same page and move forward with accomplishing the mission. So this shouldn't just be used when you have the problem. This should be a regular cadence in your leadership schedule of meeting with your employees, meeting with your team members, and evaluating how they're doing with their jobs, how they're doing personally, and making sure that you're in a position to be the best support you can, and then to make hard decisions if you have to. Well, thanks so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.